Today we'll be looking at storage options for vintage computers of all kinds. One of the things that is usually the most annoying part is failing mechanical drives, such as this little SCSI hard drive that is from a PowerBook Duo. This one's actually still in working condition, which is pretty amazing given how old this is. 1992 it says on the label. I did exchange it for something I will be telling you a little bit more about in a bit. This is an old MFM hard drive, I believe. It's 10 or 20 megabytes from one of the older IBM XTs. You can see what that monstrosity looks like. Not a lot of storage, but back then, all the rage. Haven't tested this yet, so I don't know if it works. But if it doesn't, I have something for that as well. Mechanical issues are usually the first to happen in older machines, except from leaking capacitors, which plague some eras more than others. And so, fortunately, there are a bunch of clever people who have developed replacements for pretty much anything that you want. And so what I'll be covering today is some of those options in no particular order. Let's start with options to replace storage on IBM compatibles. There is a nifty device called an XT IDE, which you can see here. Now what this is an 8-bit ISA card with its own ROM chip. And what you can do with that is you stick that into an IBM compatible, works with an XT upwards. And it allows you to install IDE or parallel ATA PATA drives, if you will. This is a special version. You kind of can see the IDE port right here. What someone's done is they've added a compact flash card adapter on top, so you can actually use compact flash cards as your storage device. There are other versions where you can have an internal IDE port as well as an external one for compact flash. So you can use mechanical drives or SSDs that use an IDE interface. We'll get to that later. It's quiet, it's silent if you don't add an internal one, a mechanical drive, if you can still find one that works. But that is a pretty convenient way to get storage added, reliable storage added to an old IBM compatible XT or AT, for instance. Haven't tried this one out. There will be a separate episode for when I'm installing this in one of my next project computers. Now, having talked about IDE as a standard, a lot of those drives will fail as well. And so what you can do is just use SSD devices instead. I have two 44-pin IDE adapters with compact flash storage on here that I usually use in machines that have an IDE interface. Now this is usually for laptops. There are adapters where you can put them into an enclosure that needs or is provisioned for a 3.5-inch storage device. Now what these do is, it's essentially a pretty simple, and these are very similar, these two. Let me open this up to show you. Now this enclosure, you can usually get these between $8 and $12 on your favorite online store. And I've used about 10 or so, probably more in the past, and they're pretty reliable. But all they do is essentially adapt a not compact flash, a proper SSD module to the IDE interface. So this is the actual storage. In this case, we have a 32 gigabyte flash storage SATA card that you simply stick in here and screw it down, put the enclosure back together, and you have the equivalent of a 2.5-inch laptop IDE drive. Works fairly well. Sometimes this isn't exactly the size of a 2.5-inch drive. I sometimes find that they're just a tiny bit too large, and you either have problems getting them into the space, or you might do some damage to wherever you put them. And so there are smaller variants such as this that can deal with a much more confined space. Now, if you have the choice, and you can, I would always go for the 2.5-inch enclosure. And the reason is this one here, and I can show you, I have not found an adapter yet where the flash storage chips don't get in the way of some of the components of the adapter board here. And I have had to return many a flash storage SATA card because it just wouldn't fit, and you could not screw it in place, and so it would always flap about and might do damage to either the contacts, not make proper contact, or whatnot. So I cannot really recommend this particular form factor unless you have no choice. These are really hard to find. Even this one has chips on both sides, and so slightly collides with it. I cannot fully screw it in. You see, it's still, don't know if you can see that difference here, but it's virtually impossible to screw this in place. So if you can, if you have the space, I would always go for this solution here. If you need a 3.5-inch form factor, you can still use these. Then you will obviously need an adapter because usually the 3.5-inch devices use a 40-pin interface as well as power. This one here delivers power over the 44-pin interface. The 40-pin does not. And so in the simplest use case, what you can do is use a very simple adapter like this. So you have the 44-pin interface goes on here. And then you can connect this to your 40-pin cable in your computer that only has like the 40-pin interface, as well as feed it some power from one of the Molex adapters or cables that you might have around. You may have to get a Y splitter, so if you don't have any Molex cables available to feed power to the device, get a Y splitter. It's pretty easy to add. Adds a little bit to the cable salad in your computer potentially, but it works. Another option to deal with IDE based devices is just use a SATA drive. And I have an example here. This is from an Apple X Xserve, and the internal interface on some of those models is based on IDE, and this is the 40-pin style connector. So you will have to feed extra power to the device. This is a SATA spinning hard drive. It's a Western Digital NAS drive, which I've stuck in here. You can't get 1 terabyte sizes for 3.5-inch drives. I've tried. They might be available somewhere. I haven't found them, so I had to go for the small 2.5-inch form factor and then get this adapter board here to hook up the SATA device, or the SATA interface from the hard drive to the IDE PATA interface from the enclosure for the Xserve. So there's another possibility to use a more modern drive, and you can use SSDs obviously here as well, and connect them through one of these adapters that are readily available to your IDE-based computer. Here's one of these adapters. So you connect this to the SATA interface and power of your hard drive, and then this to the IDE cable in your computer, and feed it some power. This one here already has the splitter built in, so you don't necessarily lose a Molex power cable. Let's talk about something slightly different for a moment. Floppies. Now these little magnetic floppy disks, this is a 3.5-inch high density 1.44 megabyte formatted floppy. They are used in so many devices all over the place, but you can also see them in Ataris, Amigas. You can still use them. You can still find sealed boxes, and more often than not, they actually in still pretty good condition. At least that is my own experience. Yes, you'll find the occasional one that is just beyond repair, might have mold, scratches on the magnetic surface that makes it impossible to use. But you can use USB-powered floppy drives to put images on these and then interact with your older computers. I've used this to create DOS or Windows 3.1, for instance, installation floppies for computers that didn't have CD-ROM drives or any other options of getting data on them. You don't always need to do that, but sometimes it's fun to go through that experience if you're crazy like me. But there are obviously also more modern replacements for floppy drives in older equipment, and this is from a website called Big Mess of Wires. I will put a link in the info box. But this is a floppy emulation device, typically for the Mac universe. And so what this comes with is an external connector where you can hook this up and make it pretend to be a floppy drive, but you can also just take that cable out and use the internal floppy port in your Mac for the very same purpose. If for some reason you can't use the external one, it's damaged or it doesn't exist. And there is a little micro SD card slot here that holds floppy images, and then through this nifty little screen and the buttons you control which image is to be loaded, and it pretends to be a floppy representing that image to your computer. I believe you can change images on the fly, so you can run through an entire OS installation if you wish through floppies. So yeah, another nifty little device to replace floppy drives. Now here's a different version of a floppy emulator. This is called a Gotek Device. This specifically is flashed with firmware for Amigas, and so it has exactly the same connector and power as an internal floppy. So you can stick this into virtually any Amiga, and the USB device holds floppy images which you can select with those buttons here, and then the little display. I believe there's more modern versions with a fancier way of showing what you have selected. It just shows you the number of the image that you have, and pretends to be a floppy device for the Amiga. We've already talked a little bit about compact flash storage to be used on the XT IDE device. Adapters like these, where you simply stick a compact flash card into this adapter, and this is a 44-pin IDE interface. The protocols are compatible with each other, so you don't really see a lot of circuitry on these adapters. But these are also frequently used as internal hard drive replacements for Amigas and all sorts of other devices. In order for data to go onto these, if your floppies still work, you can either attempt to do an operating system installation, for instance, through the floppy drive onto the hard disk, which is represented by the compact flash card. But you can also use emulators such as WinUAE to emulate an Amiga environment, and then use devices like these to connect compact flash cards to your laptop, your computer, whatever, to get data onto these cards, and then later take them out and connect them to the IDE controller of your actual device, such as an Amiga. And so you would either connect a little ribbon cable. Sometimes you can find these adapters that have a female port on it, so you can literally just stick it onto the IDE port of your machine. Now, what are we going to do with this little thing here, the SCSI hard drive? This is a special form factor from a PowerBook Duo. There's obviously larger ones in the 3.5-inch format. We are lucky enough to have a variety of replacement formats available to us these days. And so far, I have personally only tried one of them, which is the SCSI 2SD. And there's various formats available. This is an external one that fits onto the SCSI port of, for instance, a Macintosh SE, Color Classic, etc. And I use it for data transfer, backup storage, etc., etc. And you have a micro SD card slot here. This is your USB port to configure the device. So this is the SD card, micro SD card is the actual storage. Pretends to be an external hard drive. You can configure some of the devices to be CD-ROMs, even if you wish. Pretty flexible, allows for data exchange. There are also internal versions, such as this one here. This is intended to be used to replace 3.5-inch drives. So the SD card would go here. Here's a USB port to configure the device, and then you can either buy or print yourself a mounting bracket to screw that on, which would allow you to mount it to pretty much standard mounting infrastructure in a Macintosh or any other machine that uses an internal SCSI bus. There are a variety of SCSI alternatives out there, like Blue SCSI and others. I have no experience with anything but the SCSI 2SD ones. They've been pretty well behaved so far. A little bit on the expensive side, I do have to admit. Others like the Blue SCSI are much cheaper, so when I get a chance I will try these out. And that concludes our overview of storage mechanisms that we have available to get to enjoy our old legacy computers for a little bit longer. I will put links to some of these products down into the description below, so you can discover them yourself. If you have any questions, comments, put them in the comment section. And thank you for watching.